Clara's hand was already on the door handle of the coffee shop when Sebastian said the one thing she had not expected to hear. "You always do this," he said. She stopped, her fingers tightened against the cold metal. Outside, the Edinburgh wind was pressing flat against the glass, and in the reflection she could see the slight stiffening of her own shoulders, the particular set of her jaw that appeared whenever she was about to say something incomplete. "Do what?" she said without turning around. "Leave," Sebastian said quietly, right at the moment when the conversation starts to matter. She turned. He was still at their corner table, one elbow on the wood, his coffee cold in front of him, his eyes watching her without the slightest discomfort. That was the thing about Sebastian Mercer that no one who had not spent real time with him could understand from a distance. He did not look away. He did not fill silence with small talk or reach for his phone or drift towards safer ground. He simply stayed and watched and waited, and the effect of it was not cold at all. It was the most deliberately attentive presence she had ever experienced, and it unsettled her in ways she could not neatly explain to herself even now, 4 months into knowing him. "I have a 9 o'clock lecture," she said. "It is 8:15, he said. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Sit down, Clara," he said. She sat down. He reached forward and turned his coffee cup a quarter turn on the saucer. She had noticed this habit over the past 4 months. He turned the cup when he was thinking through something carefully, as though the small physical action helped him stay with the thought rather than rushing past it. She had never told him she had noticed this. It felt like too much information to have about another person, too close to an admission of how carefully she had been watching and for how long and with what specific quality of attention. "I was not leaving because of the conversation," she said. "I know," he said, "but you were." Clara looked out the window. Outside, November was doing what it always did in Edinburgh, grey and decisive and completely indifferent to the people moving through it. A woman across the street was fighting with a broken umbrella, losing quietly and with dignity. A man in a dark jacket stood at the bus stop with his hands in his pockets, staring at the middle distance. A schoolchild on a red bicycle navigated the pavement with complete confidence, as though the wet stone and the November wind were not real obstacles but merely suggestions. "We were talking about the Tsvetieva translations," Clara said. "That is not a difficult topic." "We were," Sebastian agreed, and then I said that her later work had a kind of courage in it, a willingness to say the thing plainly regardless of the cost, and you went quiet for 10 seconds and then said you needed to go. Clara looked back at him. "I did not go quiet for 10 seconds. "You did," he said. "I counted." She stared at him. There was something at the edge of his expression, not quite a smile, but its outline. He was waiting to see what she did with this. "Why were you counting?" she said. "Because I was curious what would happen next," he said. "When something catches you off guard, you go one of 2 ways, you stay with it or you leave. Tonight you were going to leave." Clara pressed her fingers flat against the edge of the table, grounding herself. This was the fundamental problem with spending time with Sebastian. He noticed things that other people did not notice, not in the way that felt like surveillance, not cataloging faults or gathering material to use against you later, but in the way of someone paying genuine attention. She had not experienced this kind of attention from another person in years, and she had forgotten how exposed it made you feel, not invaded, not surveilled, simply terrifyingly seen. "What were you going to ask me?" she said. "After the remark about courage, you were building towards something." "I was going to ask," Sebastian said, "whether you have ever written anything that truly frightened you, not for work, not for students, something honest, something just for yourself." The question arrived with precision. It sounded simple and was, in fact, aimed at exactly the part of her she most carefully concealed. She had been asked intrusive questions before and had deflected them all without effort, but Sebastian never asked intrusive questions. He asked accurate ones, and accuracy was far harder to sidestep. "That is very personal," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "you do not have to answer." "Then why ask it?" "Because I think the answer matters," he said, "and I think you know that it matters, which is why you were going to leave." She looked at him for a long moment. He held the look steadily, without any pressure in it, without the urgency of someone who needed a particular answer. He simply looked, he simply waited. "No," she said, "I have not." Sebastian nodded. He accepted the answer. She could see, did not quite believe it, not because he thought she was lying outright, but because he understood that the answer was not the whole truth. She had written things. In the middle of the night, in notebooks she kept in drawers, things that frightened her when she reread them. She had never finished any of them. She had always stopped before they became real. She suspected he knew this. She suspected he had been waiting for her to say it. She suspected, moreover, that she had been waiting to say it too, and that this was the real reason she had very nearly walked out of the coffee shop at 8:15 on a grey November morning. Tsvetiva finished everything, Clara said, even the things that cost her everything. Yes, Sebastian said, she did. He lifted his cold coffee and drank from it without any sign that the temperature bothered him. She had noticed this too. He never wasted food or drink, never left a cup untouched. It was the habit of someone who had learned early that things were not guaranteed to be there when you returned for them. He had grown up with less than people assumed, she had gathered, though he did not talk about it directly. The evidence was always in the small things, the habits, the particular care with which he handled whatever he had. They stayed for another 45 minutes. She stopped telling herself she needed to go. The 9 o'clock lecture was one she had delivered 8 times and could manage without preparation, and he knew this, and she suspected he had known it when he first pointed out the time. They talked about a manuscript he was considering for the press, a collection of correspondence between 2 academics in the 1940s, letters that were formally about scholarship, and were, in their margins and their footnotes, about something far more pressing. The footnotes are where the real letter is, Sebastian said. The body of the text is performance. What they actually mean to say is in the margins where there is room for it. Clara looked at him carefully. People almost never put the most important thing in the center, she said, half to herself. No, he agreed, they put it at the edges, where there is plausible deniability. She did not respond to this. She looked down at the table. After a moment, Sebastian said, I do not do that. I try not to, anyway. I know, she said. It came out more honestly than she intended. She meant it as a simple observation, but it landed like a small confession, the acknowledgement that she had been paying attention, that she had noticed the directness, that it had affected her in ways she was not ready to say. Sebastian looked at her when she said it. He looked for a beat longer than necessary, then he looked back at the table. Good, he said quietly. Outside, the bus had come and gone. The coffee shop was nearly empty. The woman at the counter was stacking cups with the efficient routine of someone approaching the end of her shift. Why do you always bring a book and never open it? Clara said. Sebastian looked down at the book still face down beside his elbow. He picked it up, turned it over, considered the cover and set it back down. Old habit, he said. I used to bring a book everywhere because I was afraid of silences. If things went quiet, the book was an exit. I have not needed it for a while, but the carrying stayed. You were afraid of silences, Clara said. I was, he said, until I learned to trust them. What changed? He looked at her. I stopped needing them to end, he said. I stopped waiting for the discomfort to pass and just let it be there. After a while, it was not uncomfortable anymore. It was just honest. She thought about this. She thought about all the silences she had filled over the years, all the words she had used to keep herself from being present with whatever was actually there. She was a person who talked fluently and said almost nothing. She had always known this about herself. She had never had someone name the exact mechanism of it with such quiet clarity. She put on her coat. He walked out with her as he always did, down the stone steps and onto the pavement. The wind was decisive and cold. A group of students went past in a cloud of noise and coats. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. He nodded. She turned and walked south toward the university, and she did not look back. She knew if she did, he would still be standing there watching her go, and she did not trust herself to manage that quietly. The 6 months leading to this point had been the strangest of Clara's adult life. She had met Sebastian in September at a book launch organized by their mutual friend Owen, who edited a literary journal, and had invited both of them to the launch of a poet neither of them had heard of. The poet had read 4 excellent poems, and then the wine had come out, and the room had filled with the particular noise of literary Edinburgh being social. Clara had found the quietest corner and examined the bookshelves. Sebastian had been doing the same thing. They had noticed each other without speaking for a full minute, reading spines in parallel, and then he had said without preamble, Do you read them left to right or right to left? Left to right, she said. Same, he said, though I have met people who insist right to left is faster. It is not, she said. No, he agreed, it really is not. They had talked for 45 minutes in that corner. She had not edited herself. She had simply said what she thought, and he had said what he thought, and the effect had been so unusual, so thoroughly unlike every other social interaction she had experienced in recent memory, that she had walked home afterward in the November dark feeling something she could not immediately name. She had named it later, lying in bed. It was relief. They had exchanged numbers at the end of the evening. Sebastian had texted within a week, a single line from a Tisvetiva poem, no context, no explanation. She had stared at it for 10 minutes and then sent back a line from the next stanza. He had sent a line from a different poem by the same poet. She had moved to a different poet entirely, same emotional register. He had replied with a poet from a completely different country, same feeling underneath. This had gone on for 90 minutes that first night, and neither of them had ever mentioned it directly, and it had not stopped. Coffee had begun in October. By the third week it was simply what they did on Thursday mornings, without discussion, without ceremony. Neither of them had ever said, "This is what we are doing now." It simply became true, the way things that are suited to each other tend to become true. In October there had also been the visit to his press. He had invited her to come and look at a set of 19th century pamphlets he was cataloguing, and she had gone on a Tuesday afternoon, and the press was exactly what she had expected from a person like Sebastian, a narrow building on a quiet street, organized with complete seriousness, every shelf labeled, every item in its place. He had taken her upstairs to the archive room where the light was better, and they had stood close together over a flat table, her leaning forward to examine a particular hand in one of the letters, his arm reaching past her to angle the page, and their hands had met on the edge of the paper. His fingers had brushed the backs of hers, and neither of them had moved away immediately. It lasted perhaps 2 or 3 seconds, possibly 4. When she thought about it afterward, which she did, repeatedly, she could not say with certainty who had moved first, or whether the stillness had been intentional or simply the natural pause of two people concentrating. But she knew what she had felt in those seconds, and she knew that feeling was not compatible with the story she had been telling herself about what this was. In November there had been the evening they walked in the rain. They had been coming from an event at the university, and the rain had started suddenly, a real Edinburgh rain, serious and cold and immediately committed, and Sebastian had said his house was closer, and she had said yes, and they had gone there. He had made tea while she stood in the hallway taking off her coat, and she had looked at his bookshelves while the rain hit the windows, and he had come from the kitchen with 2 cups, and they had sat in the library for 3 hours while the storm outside did what it wanted, and inside they talked about a book she was writing the introduction to, and a problem he was having with a supplier, and a poem she had read that morning that she had not thought to mention to anyone until that moment. She had gone home at midnight feeling warm in a way that had nothing to do with the tea, and everything to do with the room. In the first week of December, there had been the text message. It had arrived at 11:45 at night, a single line from a poem she did not recognize, and she had Googled the line to find the source and had lain awake for an hour afterward, not because the poem was disturbing, but because the line was exactly the right line, the one that expressed precisely the thing she had been thinking about for 3 months and had not been able to name. He had known she would understand it. He had sent it specifically to her because he had known she would understand it, and the understanding of this had made the room feel very quiet and her own heartbeat feel very loud. She walked toward the university through the cold November morning. She held her scarf against her throat and told herself again that she was not going to do anything about it. That she was going to hold this carefully and not damage it with the weight of what she felt, not tip the precise balance of what existed between them. She was good at holding things carefully. She had been doing it all her life. She told herself this for exactly 3 more weeks. Then she wrote the letter. At 2 in the morning, on a Tuesday in the 3rd week of December, with the city outside silent and the flat dark around her except for the lamp on the writing desk, Clara sat down and wrote the most honest thing she had ever put to paper. She had not decided to write it. She had decided against writing it repeatedly over the previous 3 weeks, with increasing firmness. She had made the decision so many times that it had begun to feel like a structure, the decision not to do the thing she wanted to do, the decision to hold back, the decision to protect herself at the expense of the truth. She was very good at these decisions. She had been making them all her life, and they had served her well in the sense that they had kept her safe, and poorly in the sense that safe was not the same as present. What had happened this particular Tuesday evening had not been dramatic. There had been no argument, no crisis, no obvious turning point that she could point to and say, that was the moment. Sebastian had texted her at 9 in the evening to say he had found the pamphlet they had spoken about 2 months ago, a small privately printed set of poems from the 1920s that she had been trying to track down for years, first through the university library and then through his press contacts, and then eventually through the resignation of a person who has accepted that some things do not turn up. It had turned up. He had found it without telling her he was looking. She had gone to his house at 9:30. He had made tea. They had sat in the library in the usual configuration, him in the reading chair, her at the window seat, the low lamps doing the usual thing to the room, which was to make it feel like somewhere outside of ordinary time. A room you entered when you needed to think properly. He had given her the pamphlet. She had held it in both hands as though it had weight beyond its physical size, turning the pages slowly, reading a line here and there with the particular attention she brought to things she had been waiting for, and at some point she had looked up and found him watching her with the expression he sometimes had when she was concentrated on something. It was quiet and entirely attentive, as though her reading the pamphlet was something he was genuinely glad to be witnessing, not proud. Not pleased with himself for having found it, glad that she was there in his library reading a thing that mattered to her, glad that he could see it. She had understood in that moment that the warmth was not general. It was specific. It was for her particularly in the way that things between them had always been particular, always precise, always aimed. They had talked until 10:30, about the pamphlet, about the poet, about a book Sebastian was reading that he described in 3 precise sentences that made her want to go and find a copy immediately, about a disagreement he was having with another press about attribution rights, about a passage she had read that morning in a book she was reviewing, a passage about the specific pain of loving something that cannot love you back, which was written about a painting but applied, as good sentences tend to everything else as well. When she left, he had walked her to the side door and held it open, and as she stepped past him she had been close enough to feel the warmth of him and had kept walking, out into the cold, and had walked the 12 minutes home with her face turned down against the wind and her hands in her pockets, and the feeling still lodged in her chest like something that had decided to stay. She had gotten into bed. She had stared at the ceiling for 1 hour and 40 minutes, listening to the building settle around her, the tick of the pipes, the faint sound of a car on the road below. Then she had gotten up, gone to the desk, and sat down. The first attempt was entirely wrong. She got 3 sentences in and stopped, crossed them out, and started again. The second attempt was better but still off, too formal, too much like something she might submit for professional review, all the feeling organized and contained behind correct grammatical structure. She crossed that out too and smoothed the paper flat with her palm. Then she sat for a moment with the pen uncapped and looked at the blank space in front of her. She thought about what Sebastian had said about footnotes, about putting the important thing at the edges so there was room to retreat. She thought about how many years she had been doing this, and how tired she was of it, and how much she did not want to do it anymore, specifically in relation to this specific person, who had never put anything at the edges, who had always said the thing he meant in the center, and who deserved, she thought, the same in return. She began to write. She wrote about the bookshelves in September. She wrote about the exact quality of the silence that had existed between them before he said his first words to her, the way it had not been uncomfortable, the way it had felt instead like a shared agreement. She wrote about the text messages, and how she had looked forward to them with an urgency that she had tried to pass off as literary enthusiasm, and had known, privately, was not that at all. She wrote that she had once stayed awake past midnight, when she had work the next morning and knew she should sleep, because she had been exchanging lines with him and did not want to be the one to stop. She wrote that this had been in October. She wrote that by November it was worse. She wrote about the archive room. She did not overdramatize it. She wrote it plainly, what had happened, the proximity, the 2 or 3 seconds, the stepping apart. She wrote that she had thought about it afterward. She wrote how many times she had thought about it, which was a larger number than was reasonable, and that she had spent time trying to tell herself this was because the moment had been ambiguous and she was simply analyzing it, as one might analyze an unclear passage of text, and that she had stopped believing this story approximately 2 weeks after it started. She wrote about the November evening in the rain. She wrote about sitting in the library for 3 hours while the storm did what it wanted outside, and inside they simply talked, and how going home at midnight had felt like leaving somewhere she had not wanted to leave, and how she had stood in her own hallway afterward thinking, "That is the place I want to be, in that library, with that person." This was the moment she had first known it clearly, she wrote, and she had not been able to unknow it since. She wrote that she was not good at saying the important things directly. She wrote that she was, in fact, very bad at it, and that she had been bad at it for her entire adult life, and that it had cost her things she could not fully calculate. She wrote that she did not want it to cost her this. That she was aware, as she was writing, that she might very much regret sending this letter, and that she was going to send it anyway, because the not sending of it had stopped feeling like an option the moment she looked up from the pamphlet at 9:30 on a Tuesday evening and saw his face. She wrote that she did not know what he felt. She wrote that she was aware she might be entirely mistaken, and that the thought of that made her feel unsteady in a way she could not remember feeling since she was very young. She wrote that she was going to say it anyway. She wrote that she was tired of the footnotes. She wrote that she was in love with him. She did not use those exact words. She had tried them in an earlier draft and they had felt too small, too well-worn, too easy to say, and therefore too easy to dismiss. She wrote around them instead in the way she wrote most things, specific and exact, building the picture from its details rather than its label. She wrote what it was like, what it had been doing to her since October, what she had been doing to manage it, and how the managing had lately become more effort than anything it was protecting. She wrote that this frightened her extremely. She wrote that she was not writing to create an obligation. She wrote that she was writing it because he was a person who had asked her 3 weeks ago whether she had ever written something that truly frightened her, and she had said no, which was not quite true, and she wanted to correct the record. The letter was 4 pages. She wrote the last line at 3:20 in the morning, and then she sat with it in front of her and read it through once. Her handwriting was steady. This surprised her. She had expected her hands to be shaking, but they were not. She had expected the words on the page to look reckless or impulsive, but they did not. They looked considered, clear, and entirely true, and this was, if anything, more frightening than if they had looked like a mistake. She folded the pages. She found the cream envelopes in the bottom drawer of the desk, and she put the letter inside and sealed it. She did not address it. She did not need to. For approximately 10 minutes, she sat at the desk with the sealed envelope in her hands and did not move. She thought about putting it back in the drawer. She thought about the drawer in a serious and considered way, about how the drawer was a perfectly good place for the letter, where it would be safe, where no one would find it, where it could not alter anything or be answered or cause any change at all to the careful, manageable, terrifyingly wonderful thing that existed between them. The drawer was a very reasonable option. She had been choosing the drawer in one form or another for 4 months. She put on her coat and scarf over her night clothes and picked up the envelope and walked out of the flat. The Edinburgh streets at 3:45 in the morning were as close to empty as a city ever gets. A taxi went past on the main road, its light off. A fox sat in the mouth of an alley on George Street, watching her with complete indifference, its eyes catching the lamplight before it turned and disappeared. Bins had been put out on one side street, lined up along the pavement in a row, patient and ordinary. The cold was sharp and clean and total, the kind of cold that makes the dark feel precise, and Clara walked at a pace that was slightly too fast for comfort, the envelope held against her chest under her coat, as though she was carrying something fragile that she was afraid might change its mind. She did not let herself think on the walk there. Thinking was not permitted. She had thought enough for one night. She had thought enough for several years. She kept her eyes forward and her feet moving and went over the letter in her head, not to second-guess it, but simply to hold the words steady while she still could, while they were still hers, still contained, still not yet given away. Sebastian's townhouse was dark and entirely quiet when she arrived. No lights in any window. The side entrance gate was closed but not locked. She went through it, which was not something she had done before. She had only ever been through the main door or the side door when he was there and had let her in. Walking through the gate at 4 in the morning alone felt like a different kind of entering. Smaller, more deliberate, more frightening in the specific way of things that are entirely chosen. She went to the front door of the house. There was a brass letter slot set into it at waist height, the brass worn to a dull shine from years of use. She crouched down in front of it, the cold pavement hard under her knees, and held the envelope in her fingers for a moment. She did not let herself hesitate too long. She pushed the letter through. She heard it land on the other side, a soft, papery sound in the dark, unremarkable and complete, and then she stood up and walked back through the gate and down the street the way she had come. She walked home quickly, her coat pulled tight, the cold working its way through her night clothes, the Edinburgh streets still empty around her. The relief she had expected to feel did not arrive. What arrived instead was a sensation she had no precise word for, a kind of structural change, as though something inside her that had been braced against pressure for months had finally let go, and the release of it was not comfortable. It was significant. It was the feeling of having done something that could not be undone, and the irreversibility of it was not a comfort. It was simply the truth. She reached her flat at 4:20. She made tea she did not drink and sat on the sofa with her feet tucked under her and the lamp on and the city still dark outside the window. At some point between the tea and the first pale light touching the rooftops, she fell asleep on the sofa with her coat still on. She slept for less than 2 hours. When she woke, the light in the flat was gray and cold and entirely different from the lamplight of the small hours, and the first thought she had, the very first thing that came to her before she was fully awake, was that the letter was on the other side of Sebastian's front door, and that there was nothing she could do about it now. The second thought she had was that she needed to do something about it immediately. The fear arrived at precisely 6:45 in the morning, which she knew because her eyes opened and immediately found the clock on the bedside table, and the time seemed to arrive simultaneously with the understanding of what she had done several hours earlier. She sat up. In the few seconds it took her to be fully awake, the events of the night assembled themselves into a neat and devastating sequence. The desk, the letter, the walk, the letter slot, the soft sound of the envelope landing on the other side of the door. All of it entirely and irreversibly real. Clara sat on the edge of the sofa. She had moved from there to the bed at some point after 6 still in her coat, and had slept another 40 minutes, and she pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed. The December morning light was the specific gray of a morning that has not yet committed to anything. The flat was cold because she had not turned on the heating before sleeping. Outside, a car went past slowly, its headlights still on. The problem was not the letter itself. The problem, she understood in the clear gray light of December morning, was the letter being read. The letter sitting unseen in a pile of post on the other side of Sebastian's door was one thing. The letter being opened and unfolded and read by Sebastian Mercer, who paid careful attention to everything, who noticed the things at the edges, who did not look away, that was something else entirely. She needed to get the letter back. This thought arrived with such force that she was on her feet before she had quite consciously decided to stand. She was pulling her coat on, still wearing it actually, having apparently never taken it off, and reaching for her keys before the more rational part of her mind caught up and pointed out several practical difficulties with this plan. The most significant practical difficulty was that she did not have a key to Sebastian's house. She stopped with her hand on the front door of her flat. She did not have a key to Sebastian's house. She thought about this very carefully, standing at her own front door at 7 o'clock in the morning with her coat half on and her hair uneven from sleeping in it, and the city just beginning to make its morning sounds outside. She went through every possibility with the methodical care of a person who is being rational about something that is fundamentally not rational. She could ring the bell, but Sebastian was an early riser, and he might already be downstairs, might already have the post in his hand, might answer the door and stand there with the cream envelope, and she would have no explanation for being on his doorstep in sleeping clothes and a coat that had not been removed in 12 hours. She could call his phone, but he did not look at his phone until after 8. She knew this, which was why he sometimes answered texts from her at 8:30 as though they had just been sent, when she had in fact sent them at 6 in the evening the night before. The pattern was consistent. She knew the pattern because she had been paying the kind of attention to him that generated patterns. She could wait. This was the most rational option, and it was the most unbearable option. She could wait until 8 or 8:30 and call him and say what? Say she had left something at his house. She had not left anything at his house. She had in fact placed something at his house that she very urgently needed to retrieve, and the distinction between these two scenarios was significant enough that she could not quite construct a casual sentence around it. She paced, she went to the kitchen and put the kettle on and then turned it off again. She went to the window and looked at the street below, which was doing its morning routine of school uniforms and dog walkers and a delivery van making its slow way along the pavement. An older man she recognized as a neighbor was walking with his newspaper tucked under his arm, looking neither pleased nor displeased with the morning. The small, ordinary persistence of the world going about its business, while hers had apparently come to a standstill. She tried to remember, had she given Sebastian's key back? She had been given a key to his house in October. During the week he went to London to see a book dealer and had asked her with characteristic directness if she would mind watering the plants in his study. She had said yes. She had watered the plants on 2 separate days, having apparently taken the instruction quite seriously, going on Tuesday and again on Thursday because the weather had been dry and she had been worried about the one near the window. When he returned, she had meant to give the key back and had not. Not because she had wanted to keep it, not consciously, not as a plan, but because the opportunity had not presented itself cleanly and she had put it in her coat pocket, and then in the pocket of a different coat, and then in the bowl by her front door where small things accumulated and waited to be dealt with. She went to the bowl by her front door. The key was there, a simple brass key on a small ring, unremarkable, sitting between a hair tie and 2 forgotten coins. She picked it up and held it in her palm. She held it for quite some time. The using of it was a different matter from the having of it. She had a key because he had trusted her with it for a practical purpose, and that practical purpose was 4 months ago. Using it now, entering his house while he was either asleep or on his morning walk, going to his post pile, retrieving a letter she had placed there herself in the night, was not the same as watering plants. She knew it was not the same. She was aware, holding the key, that it was not the same thing at all. She was also aware that the alternative was allowing Sebastian to read 4 pages of the truest things she had ever written, and that every hour she did not act was an hour closer to that happening. She had an 8:30 tutorial to prepare for. She showered quickly and changed and sat at her kitchen table with her notes in front of her and read the same paragraph 4 times without taking any of it in. The familiar sentences about 19th century prose style seemed to belong to a different morning, a morning in which she had not spent the small hours walking through Edinburgh in her night clothes. At 8 o'clock, she made the call she had been building toward since she woke up. He did not answer. This was expected. Sebastian did not look at his phone until after 8. She did not leave a message. She could not think of a message that would not make things significantly worse. At 8:15 she called again. He did not answer. She tried not to read too much into this. The possibilities were simple. He was on his walk, his phone was in his coat, he had not heard it. The alternative possibilities that he was awake and was looking at her name on the screen and choosing not to pick up because he had already read the letter and was deciding what to say, she pushed away with conscious effort. She had no information. She was filling the gap with catastrophe. This was her most reliable bad habit. She made herself eat something. She drank coffee. She taught the 8:30 tutorial with what her student Lucy, a perceptive second year who noticed things, later described as a particular focused energy, like you were concentrating very hard on something that was not actually the tutorial. Clara had said, "Thank you, Lucy." The 19th century rewards focused attention. Lucy had looked at her in a way that suggested she was not convinced. At 9:30 she stepped out of the tutorial room and called again. No answer. She went to her office and sat with the door closed, which was unusual enough that her colleague Philip knocked at 10:30 to ask if she was all right, and she said she was fine with sufficient conviction that he believed her, which surprised her because she was not fine at all. She was the specific opposite of fine. She was a person who had, in the small hours of a Tuesday morning, committed herself irrevocably to a course of action, and was now sitting in the wreckage of that decision, waiting for the consequences to begin. She was also, she realized slowly, making this worse by waiting. Sebastian's Wednesday morning routine was one she knew with reasonable precision. He was an early riser, up by 6:30, coffee before 7, a walk of 40 to 50 minutes starting at approximately 9:15, back by 10:30. He collected his post before the walk, usually, unless he was particularly absorbed in something. He did not work from home on Wednesdays. He went to the press in the afternoon after lunch. He was methodical. He was predictable, not in a boring way, but in the way of a person who had decided what kind of life suited them and had arranged that life accordingly. If she went to his house while he was on his walk between 9:15 and 10:30 and used the key and found the letter and took it back, then the morning could be salvaged. Then none of it needed to be real. She would put the letter in the drawer where it belonged, where it had always belonged, and they would have Thursday coffee and talk about books, and everything would be exactly as it was. Exactly as it was. She stopped. She sat very still at her desk and considered what she was contemplating. She was contemplating entering a person's home without their knowledge to retrieve a letter she had placed there herself, in order to prevent them from reading the honest contents of that letter, because the honest contents of that letter had been honest, and the honesty had been a mistake, and she wanted to undo the honesty before it had any consequences. She was aware that this was not straightforward. She was also aware that everything in it was entirely consistent with how she had been operating for 34 years, and that perhaps this was the problem. She looked at the key on her desk. She had taken it from the bowl that morning and put it in her coat pocket, which told her that some part of her had already made this decision at 7 o'clock and was simply waiting for the rest of her to catch up. She taught a 12 o'clock seminar. She taught it well. Teaching was one of the places where she was most fully herself, where the need to be present and clear and engaged with what was in front of her overrode everything else. Her students were sharp and asked good questions. One of them made a connection between two texts she had not previously considered, and she spent 10 minutes genuinely pursuing this connection, and for those 10 minutes the letter did not exist. Afterward, 3 students stayed to discuss an essay question, and she answered their questions with full attention, and felt the specific relief of being useful for the purposes for which she was designed. The hour ended. She walked back to her office, gathered her things, put on her coat, felt the key in her pocket, and decided. The walk to Sebastian Street took 12 minutes at a normal pace and 9 at the pace she was walking now. The December afternoon was already dim, the Edinburgh light retreating early, and the cold had increased from the morning's sharp clarity into something grayer and heavier. She went over the plan as she walked. He would be at the press by now. He always left for the press by noon on Wednesdays. His house would be empty. She would go in through the side entrance, find the letter on the hall table or the post pile, and come back out. The entire thing would take under 10 minutes. She turned the corner onto his street. She stopped at the gate. She pressed her fingers around the key in her pocket and took a breath of cold December air. She thought about Sebastian's expression in the library on Tuesday evening when she had been reading the pamphlet, the warmth in his face, the gladness of it. She thought about what that expression had made her feel, and why she had written the letter, and whether the letter had been a mistake or whether what she was about to do now was the actual mistake. She thought about it for approximately 15 seconds, then she opened the gate and went in. The key slid into the lock on the first attempt, which was not entirely surprising but still felt significant in a way she did not want to examine too closely. Clara turned it, heard the mechanism shift, and the side door swung inward. She went in. The house was quiet with the particular quality of a space that has been empty for several hours. Not the acute silence of someone being very still in another room, but the settled quiet of a place where no one has moved or spoken since morning, the kind of quiet that has had time to become itself. The hallway smelled of cedar and paper, and the faint trace of whatever coffee Sebastian had made that morning, the smell of his routines and his specific ordinary life. In the gray December afternoon light coming through the high window above the stairs, everything was exactly as she knew it. The coat rack with his dark gray coat absent from it. Good, he was at the press. The small table below the window with the wicker sorting basket beside it. The corridor leading to the kitchen and the library beyond. She closed the door behind her very carefully. She did not take off her coat. She was not going to be here long enough for that. She went directly to the small table by the front hallway and looked at it. There were 3 items on the table: a catalogue from an antiquarian book fair that had been mailed to him, a brown paper package that looked like a returned manuscript, a receipt from somewhere folded once. There was no cream envelope. Clara's eyes went over the table again. She moved the catalogue and looked beneath it. She lifted the brown package. She checked the sorting basket and felt along the bottom of it. She checked the floor below the letter slot in the front door, in case the letter had not made it to the table and had been kicked aside or overlooked during the morning. No cream envelope. She stood very still in the corridor and tried to think rationally. The possibilities were straightforward. Sebastian had not yet collected his post from the floor beneath the letter slot, in which case the letter might still be there. Or he had collected the post and taken it somewhere other than this table. Or he had already opened and read the letter and it was somewhere else entirely. She went to the front door of the house and looked at the floor of the interior hallway. A credit card statement, a circular from a local business, 1 postcard from what looked like Portugal turned face down. She crouched and checked the corners and the strip of floor against the door. Nothing. No cream envelope. She stood up and went to the library. The library was dim, the way it always was in the afternoon. The high windows let in gray light, but Sebastian rarely opened the blinds fully during the day, preferring the diffuse quality of indirect light for reading. She knew this. She knew 100 specific things about this room, about his preferences and his habits and the logic he had applied to every arrangement in it. She had spent a great deal of time in this room and had paid a great deal of attention to it, and standing in it now without him present felt wrong in a way she was not going to examine. The reading chair was empty, a book open face down on its arm, something he had evidently been reading that morning before his walk. His desk was at the far end of the room, the surface covered in its usual organized layer of papers, notebooks, and reference books, 2 pens parallel to each other on the right-hand side. Clara went to the desk. She went through it methodically and carefully. She looked under the papers without disturbing their order. She had been in this room enough times to understand Sebastian's organizational logic, and she did not want to leave evidence of searching. The letter was not under the papers. It was not in the small tray on the left where he kept things requiring a response. It was not in the stack of manuscripts beside the tray. It was not in the wicker basket on the lower shelf of the desk. She went to the reading chair and checked the side table beside it, under the book he was reading, on the floor. She went to the window seat and checked the storage space below it. She went back to the hallway and checked the coat rack. She went to the kitchen doorway and looked in without going in, checking the counters and the kitchen table, which was clear. She went back to the library and stood in the middle of it. She stood there for a moment and breathed. The room was familiar in every detail and wrong in every way it was supposed to feel. She had been in this room many times and always felt safe here, and she did not feel safe here now. She felt like the specific kind of person she did not want to be, the kind who entered places without permission, who searched through the spaces that belonged to someone else, who came to take back a true thing because the truth had frightened them. She went back to the desk one more time and stood in front of it and looked at it properly. The writing surface itself, the leather insert slightly worn at the edges, kept clear of everything except what he was actively working on. A page of handwritten notes, something he was drafting for the press. She did not read it. She looked at the space around it. And then she saw it. In the upper left corner of the desk, turned face down so the sealed side was visible, was the cream envelope. She went still. It was there, still sealed, the flap neat and smooth. He had placed it face down, which meant either he had not yet opened it, had collected it and set it aside and not yet come back to it, or he had opened it and replaced the contents. The envelope was exactly as she had left it, sealed, intact, face down. She moved toward it. Her hand was half raised, 2 steps away from the desk, 2 steps away from taking it back, from undoing the morning, from the letter and the morning walk and the specific bravery or foolishness. She was no longer sure which, of pushing 4 honest pages through a brass slot in the dark. She was 2 steps away from all of it being as though it had never happened. She was thinking, it is still sealed, there is still time, no one has been changed by anything yet. She was 2 steps from the desk when she heard the sound. The side door. Not the creak of the gate, the door itself, the latch shifting, the quiet but unmistakable sound of someone who knew the house coming in. Someone who moved through the hallway with the deliberateness of a person in their own space, unhurried, certain. Clara froze. The clock on the mantelpiece read 9:52. Sebastian's walk started at 9:15. He should not be back for another 30 minutes at minimum. The footsteps came down the hallway toward the library, quiet and steady. Clara stood in the center of the library with the cream envelope on the desk 2 steps away from her and her hand half raised as though she had been reaching for it. And she understood, with an absolute and total clarity, that she was not going to reach it first. Sebastian Mercer appeared in the doorway of his library. He was still wearing his coat. His face was slightly reddened from the cold of the walk he had cut short, and his hair was pushed back from the wind, and he was holding his keys in his right hand. He looked at her. His eyes went to her hand, half raised, reaching, and then to the desk, and to the cream envelope on the upper left corner of it, face down exactly as he had placed it, and back to her. He was not surprised. This, more than anything else, was the thing that stopped Clara cold. He was not startled to find her here. He was not alarmed. He was not even, as far as she could tell from his expression, particularly confused about what was happening. He had come in and found her standing in the center of his library with her hand raised toward his desk, and his face held not shock but something else, something quieter and more complicated and more considered. He looked at her with the same directness he always used, and he said very quietly, "I came back early because I thought you might." The words sat in the air between them. Clara lowered her hand. She thought, in the second after he said it, about all the possible responses available to her. She could explain herself, but what explanation existed for being inside someone's home without their knowledge, reaching for a letter she had herself placed there the night before? She could apologize, but an apology required the other person to be upset, and Sebastian was not upset. His expression did not contain upset. It contained something more complicated than that, something she could not yet read. She could say nothing. She had said nothing so far. Nothing had a certain completeness to it. "I came back early because I thought you might," he had said, and the weight of that sentence, what it implied, the degree of knowing it required, the fact that he had shortened his walk not because of the weather or a forgotten errand but because he had anticipated this, had considered her specific way of thinking and arrived at the correct conclusion, was more than she could process while standing in the center of his library with the envelope 2 steps away from her and her hand still half raised. Sebastian stepped into the room. He went to the coat rack by the library door and took off his coat and hung it up. The movement was unhurried. He was not performing calmness. He was calm. Clara watched him do this and felt the surreal quality of the moment sharpen around her. A man returning home to find an uninvited person in his library, hanging up his coat as though this were a perfectly ordinary return home. He went to his reading chair and sat down. He did not say anything else immediately. He settled into the chair the way he always did, leaning back slightly, one ankle resting on the opposite knee, his hands relaxed on the arms of the chair, and looked at her, not demanding an explanation, not filling the space, simply present and attentive as though she was something interesting rather than something inconvenient, which was, she reflected, a very Sebastian way to respond to finding someone in your library. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. Outside the window, a bird moved through the winter garden, landed briefly on the stone wall, and was gone. "You changed your walk," Clara said. It was not what she had intended to say. It was the thing her mind had fixed on, perhaps because it was the most manageable piece of the situation. "I turned around at the top of the street," Sebastian said. "Because you thought I would come here," she said. "Yes," he said. "How did you know?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with the expression she had come to think of as his careful expression, the one that meant he was choosing the most accurate version of what he wanted to say, not the easiest or the most comfortable, but the truest one. "I know how you think," he said. "When something frightens you, you want to undo it if you can. The letter frightened you. You wrote it in the middle of the night, which means you were acting on feeling rather than calculation. When you woke up with time to calculate, the calculation told you that you had made yourself too visible and that you needed to correct that. I expected you to find a way to come back for it." Clara stared at him. The accuracy of this, the simple, undramatic accuracy of it, the fact that he had watched her for 4 months with sufficient care to understand the pattern of her fear response and had acted on that understanding correctly, should not have surprised her. She had known he paid attention. She had known it from the first Thursday coffee, from the first text message, from the archive room and the cup, and every small exact thing he had ever noticed about her. She had known it, and knowing it had not prepared her for what it actually felt like when the attention was turned on her at this specific moment. She sat down on the window seat. Not because she decided to, because standing was requiring more effort than it was worth. Sebastian watched her sit. He did not move from the chair. He gave her space to do whatever she needed to do, which was, she was beginning to understand, his default approach to most things. He did not push, did not crowd, did not fill the gaps with his own need for things to proceed in a particular direction. He waited. He was extraordinarily good at waiting. He had been practicing it since he was 11 years old, building walls of books against the noise of the world and learning to be still inside them. "I should not have come in," Clara said. "You had a key," he said. "A key for watering your plants," she said, 4 months ago. "You did not give it back," he said. "I know," she said. "I know you did not give it back," he said. "I noticed, but I did not ask for it. You can read into that whatever you like." Clara looked at him across the quiet room. The gray December light was doing something to the space, making it feel closer than usual, more contained, the books on all sides pressing the two of them toward the center of it. "I came to get the letter back," she said. "I know," Sebastian said. "I was going to take it before you read it," she said. "I know that too," he said. And you came back early to stop me, she said. He considered this for a moment. I came back early, he said, because I thought if you found the letter and took it back and we never spoke of it, it would be worse for you than whatever happened if I came back and we faced it. Clara looked at the floor. The stone floor of the library, darker in winter than in summer, the grain of it familiar to her now from months of sitting in this room. She had sat on this window seat many times and looked at this floor and felt the particular peace of being in a space that felt genuinely safe. She had not expected in any of those visits to be sitting here like this, coat on, caught, the letter on his desk and both of them aware of it, and neither of them pretending otherwise. Have you read it? She said. Sebastian looked at her steadily. He did not answer immediately, and the not answering was its own kind of answer, and she felt it move through her the way cold moved, not on the surface but in. Yes, he said. The word arrived simply, without embellishment, and Clara's hands, which had been clasped in her lap, tightened against each other. When? She said. This morning, he said, before my walk. So you had already read it when you decided to come back early, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him, she looked at his face and tried to find something in it that would tell her what he felt about what he had read, and she could not. He was not cold and he was not excited, and he was not closed off in the way of a person trying to manage a situation. He was simply there, present in the way he was always present, watching her work through what she was working through. You could have texted me, Clara said. You could have told me you had read it and there was no point coming. I could have, he agreed. Why did you not? Because then you would have known I had read it, but I would not have known what you were going to do next, he said. And I wanted to know what you were going to do next. She looked at him for a long moment. You wanted to see if I would come, she said. I wanted to see if you would try to take it back, he said. I thought you would. When I realized I was right, I came home. Clara thought about this, the implication of it, the fact that in the hour and a half between reading the letter and coming back from the walk, he had thought about her specifically, had modeled her behavior, had turned around and walked back because he wanted to be here when she arrived. He had decided in the space of that hour and a half that the version of events where she retrieved the letter and they continued as before was not the one he was going to allow. I do not know what to say, she said. You do not have to say anything, he said. That is easy for you to say, she said, with an edge she had not entirely intended. You read my letter, you already know what I think. I do not know anything about what you think. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with an expression that was something close to deliberate, considered vulnerability. You know more than you think, he said. I know you read the letter and came home early, Clara said. That is not an answer. No, he agreed. The clock ticked. A bus passed somewhere on the road beyond the garden wall. The quality of the silence between them was specific, not empty, not neutral, but loaded in the way of a silence between two people who have both said things, one on paper and one in coming back from a walk at the wrong time, and are still deciding how to be in the same room with those things. Sebastian said, You wrote that you have not been good at saying the important things directly. Clara went still. That was in the letter, he said. You wrote that you had been bad at it your whole life and that it had cost you things. She looked at the floor. You wrote it, he said, and then you came here to take it back, which is, if you will forgive me saying so, a very good example of the thing you said you were trying to stop doing. Clara looked up at him. He was not being unkind. He was saying a true thing in the direct way he always said true things, and the truth of it landed without cushioning and without apology, which was exactly what she should have expected. She thought about saying something sharp in response. She thought about getting up and walking out. She thought about all the exits that were available to her in this moment, all the ways of leaving, and then she sat with the thought of what that would mean, what it would cost, what this room would look like in her memory if she chose to walk out of it right now. She had been choosing exits for 34 years. She knew what they looked like from the inside afterward. She stayed where she was. You are right, she said. Sebastian looked at her. He took this in. I know, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite warm but was adjacent to it, the quality of someone saying something honest to someone they care about, with no desire to win the point. What do you want to do? Clara said. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, I want to talk to you. Not around it, not about something else, about what the letter said. Clara felt the particular fear of this, the specific, acute fear of the exact thing she had come here to prevent, and sat with it. She had written the letter to say the thing she was afraid to say, and she had then come to retrieve the letter to unsay it, and he had read it and come back early to stop her from unsaying it, and now they were here and the saying was going to happen after all, just differently than she had intended. More directly, more immediately, with him in the room. "All right," she said. Sebastian did not move from the chair. He did not lean forward or make any gesture that would have felt like pressure. "Ask me what you want to ask me," Clara said. He thought for a moment. Then he said, "Were you going to take the letter back and never say anything, just continue as we were?" "Yes," she said, "that was the plan." "And be content with that," he said. She looked at him. "No," she said, "but content was not really the point, safe was the point." He held her gaze for a moment. "Safe from what?" he said. She looked at the floor again. She looked at the familiar grain of it and the small worn spot near the reading chair, and she took a breath. "From being wrong," she said. "From having been that honest with someone and having it go nowhere. From the specific feeling of having given someone everything true about yourself and having them handle it carefully, gently, with complete kindness and give it back." She said this very quietly. When she finished, the room was so still that the clock sounded very loud. Sebastian said, after a moment, "No one has ever given that back to me carefully." She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen on him before, not the careful expression, not the attentive one, something more open than either of those, something that was, if she was reading it correctly, the equivalent of the 4 pages she had pushed through his letter slot at 4 in the morning. He stood up from the reading chair. He went to his coat on the hook. He put his hand into the breast pocket and took out the cream envelope. He set it on the table between them and sat back down. "I am not going to give it back," he said. Clara looked at the envelope, then she looked at him. "Why not?" she said. "Because you wrote it," he said, "and what you wrote was true, and I am not going to let you unmake a true thing just because it is frightening." "What if I want it back?" she said. "I know you want it back," he said. "That is not the same as it being the right thing." She looked at him. "You came back from your walk specifically to prevent me from retrieving my own letter from your house." "Yes," he said. "That is a significant thing to do," she said. "Yes," he said again. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the cream envelope on the table between them, and then he looked at her, and his expression was the open one, the one that did not guard. "Because you spent 4 months not saying it," he said, "and I watched you not say it, and I knew something was there, and I did not push because pushing is not something I do well, and then you said it. You wrote it on 4 pages of cream paper at 2 in the morning and walked through a December night to push it through my door, and I am not going to let you retreat from that, not because it serves my interests, because it serves yours." Clara looked at him. The December afternoon was fading outside the window, the gray light thinning toward evening. In the library, with the lamps still off, the room was on the edge of dark. "What are you going to do with it?" she said. Sebastian did not answer immediately. He reached forward and picked up the cream envelope. He turned it over in his hands, looked at the sealed flap, and held it with a certain deliberateness that she was beginning to recognize as his version of gathering himself before saying something he had already decided to say precisely. "I read it once," he said. "At 6 o'clock this morning in the kitchen. I was standing up. My coffee was going cold on the counter. I had meant to sit down, but I did not." Clara said nothing. "I read it a second time," he said, sitting down in here in the chair. "The coffee had gone completely cold by then. I did not care." She waited. "I remember every word," he said. The sentence was simple and landed with a weight entirely disproportionate to its length. Clara felt it in the specific part of her chest where the letter had originated, in the place where she had been holding the truest things about herself at a careful remove from anyone else for as long as she could remember. "That is not possible," she said. "It was 4 pages. 4 pages and 11 lines, he said. "You started with the evening we met. You wrote about the bookshelves at Owen's launch. You wrote about the silence before I said anything to you and how it had not been uncomfortable. You wrote that it had felt instead like a shared agreement between 2 people who did not yet know they were making one." Clara's hands were very still in her lap. "You described the text messages," he said. "You said you had tried to tell yourself they were literary. You said you knew that was not true quite early on, but that the story was easier to maintain than the alternative. You wrote that you had once stayed awake past midnight, when you had work the next morning and knew you should sleep, because you did not want to be the one to stop. She watched him speak. He was not looking at the envelope, he was looking at her. You wrote about October, he said. About the archive room, about the 2 or 3 seconds. You wrote that neither of us had moved away immediately. You wrote that you had thought about it afterward, and that the thinking about it had not made it easier to think about, and that you had tried to analyze the moment as though it were a passage of text, and had eventually stopped believing that this was what you were doing. Clara said nothing. There was nothing to say. He was reciting her own words back to her, not as a display, not to make a point, but in the calm and careful way he did everything, as though precision was the kindest available form of attention. As though the most respectful thing he could do with what she had told him was to hold it exactly as it was and not let any of it slip. You wrote about the November evening and the rain, he said. You wrote that sitting in this library for 3 hours while the storm was outside felt like being in the right place, and that going home at midnight had felt like leaving somewhere you had not wanted to leave, and that you had stood in your own hallway afterward and thought, "That is the place I want to be." You wrote that this was the moment you had first known it clearly, and that you had not been able to unknow it since. Clara looked at the floor. You wrote, he said, and his voice changed here slightly, became quieter, more deliberate, that you are not good at saying the important things directly. You wrote that you have been bad at it your entire adult life and that it has cost you things you cannot fully calculate. You wrote that you did not want it to cost you this, not this. Specifically this. She closed her eyes briefly. You wrote, he continued, that you have been in love with me since at least October, possibly earlier. You wrote that you chose not to use those words because they seemed too small for what it actually was, and that you were going to say it in the way you say everything, in the particular details, so that the person reading would understand what you meant without you needing to label it. She opened her eyes. He was watching her with an expression she was beginning to be able to name. It was not pity. It was not the careful sympathy of a person trying to let someone down gently. It was something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like recognition, like having heard something that matched something already there. You wrote that you were terrified, he said. The word you used was terrified 3 times in the final page, once about saying it, once about him finding out, and once about the very specific possibility that none of this is mutual and that he will handle the information with complete kindness and enormous care, and that the kindness and care will be, in the end, the hardest thing to endure. Clara breathed. I do not recall the exact phrasing, she said. Her voice was not quite steady. I do, he said. He set the envelope down gently on the table and looked at her. I read it twice, and I remember it. I'm not telling you this to make you feel more exposed than you already do. I am telling you because I need you to understand that I am not going to forget any of it. You cannot take it back, not from me. It is already here. He touched his chest briefly with one hand. It was such an uncharacteristic gesture from him, Sebastian, who rarely used physical expression, who kept his body quiet and still, who communicated almost everything through the careful selection of words, that Clara felt it more than almost anything else he had said, more than the reciting of the letter itself. The gesture was the real thing, small, involuntary, entirely true. You do not have to say anything in return, he said, his voice entirely level. I am not reciting your letter back to you in order to create an obligation. I am doing it because you came here to take a true thing back, and I am not going to allow that, and I wanted you to understand that what you wrote is not gone. It is not retrievable. It is already somewhere, it cannot be undone. Clara was quiet for a long moment. The room was very still. Outside the window, the December light had reduced itself to almost nothing. She said finally, from being wrong, from having been that honest with someone and having it go nowhere, from the specific feeling of having given someone everything true about yourself and having them handle it carefully, gently, with complete kindness and give it back. Sebastian said, after a moment, no one has ever given that back to me carefully. She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Something more open than his usual expressions. Something that was, if she was reading it correctly, the equivalent of the 4 pages she had pushed through his letter slot at 4 in the morning. He stood up from the reading chair. He went to his coat on the hook. He put his hand into the breast pocket and took out the cream envelope. He set it on the table between them and sat back down. I am not going to give it back, he said. Clara looked at the envelope, then she looked at him. "Why not?" she said. "Because you wrote it," he said, "and what you wrote was true, and I am not going to let you unmake a true thing just because it is frightening." "You are saying this for me," she said. "Partly," he said. "What is the other part?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the envelope on the table between them, then he looked at her. "I wrote you a letter this morning," he said. Clara went very still. Sebastian looked up from the envelope and held her gaze. "Between reading yours the second time and leaving for my walk, I sat at that desk and I wrote you a letter. It took approximately 30 minutes. It is in the right-hand drawer of the desk." Clara turned her head and looked at the desk, the right-hand drawer. She turned back to Sebastian. "What does it say?" she said. He considered this. "I think," he said, "that you should read it and find out. I can tell you that it is honest. I can tell you that it took approximately 4 months to arrive at the honesty, which means that in terms of timing, we are fairly evenly matched." Clara felt something shift in her chest, something that had been braced and tight since 6:45 that morning beginning to loosen, not all at once but at the edges. She was not sure what to call the feeling. It was not relief exactly. It was something more complicated than relief, something that contained both hope and fear in proportions she could not yet separate. "Why did you not send it?" she said. "Because I had your letter," he said. "I thought the appropriate next step was to see what you were going to do, whether you were going to call me or come to the door or come in without invitation. I thought if I sent my letter and you came to take yours back, the two letters would exist simultaneously and neither of us would have said anything to the other in person, and that was not the version of this that I wanted." "What version did you want?" she said. "This one," he said, "where we are in the same room, where you cannot put it back in the drawer." Clara sat with this. She sat with the fact of a man who had read 4 honest pages of her interior life, and had then sat down and written his own, and had then walked to the top of his street and turned around and come back because he had thought her through correctly and known she would come, and had wanted to be here when she arrived, and had wanted her to find him here. She said, "Are you frightened?" He said without hesitation, "Yes." She looked at him more or less than usual. "More," he said, "significantly more." "That is something," she said. The edge of his expression changed, not quite a smile but its near relation. "It is something," he agreed. Outside the window, what was left of the December light had almost gone. The library was dark now, properly dark, and Clara got up from the window seat and went to the floor lamp in the corner and turned it on. The familiar amber light filled the room, the books pulling back into visibility, the reading chair and the desk finding their usual shapes, and the room becoming again the room she had been coming to for months. She stood in the middle of it. "Can I read it?" she said. Sebastian looked at her. He considered for a moment, not with any reluctance, but with the carefulness of a person who is about to do something significant and wants to do it properly. "Yes," he said. He got up from the reading chair, went to the desk, opened the right-hand drawer. He took out a sealed envelope, white, smaller than hers, his own handwriting on the front, 2 words, her name, her full name, Clara Voss. She had not been prepared for the effect of seeing her own name in his handwriting. It was precise and deliberate and exactly like him, and it undid something in her that she had not known was still held together. He held the envelope out to her. She took it. "Sit in the chair," Sebastian said. "I will put the kettle on." She looked up at him. "You are going to make tea," she said. "Yes," he said. "You are going to read the letter. This seems like the right order of things." He said it so simply, so practically, in the way he managed most things that were actually large, with the removal of ceremony, with the making of ordinary the thing that was in fact extraordinary. And Clara sat down in his reading chair with his letter in her hands, and she watched him go to the kitchen, and she heard the water running and the click of the kettle and the small domestic sounds of a person moving around a familiar space. She looked down at the envelope. She opened it. The letter was 3 pages. She had half expected 1 or perhaps 2. Sebastian was not a person who used more words than a situation required. But 3 pages in his careful, even hand, filled front and back, and she looked at them for a moment before beginning to read, simply holding the weight of them, the fact of them. She began to read. He had started it abruptly, no preamble, no addressed greeting, as though he had been mid-thought for a very long time, and the letter was simply the continuation of it. The first sentence read, There are a number of things I have been working up to saying and have not said, and I find that I am tired of working up to them. Clara felt her breath shift. She kept reading. He wrote about the evening at Owen's launch. He wrote about it differently than she had. She had written about the silence before he spoke, about the quality of it, about feeling seen. He wrote about what he had seen. He wrote that he had noticed her at the bookshelves from across the room before he had gone over, that he had watched her for several minutes reading the spines with the focused attention of someone who genuinely wanted to know what was there, and not just to appear to be attending a party, and that he had thought, watching her, that is a person who pays attention to things. He wrote that this was not a common quality, in his experience, and that he had gone over because he had wanted to be in a room with someone who paid that kind of attention. He wrote that the 45 minutes at the bookshelves had been, for him, the most genuinely engaging conversation he had had in years. He wrote this without apparent self-consciousness, as a simple fact, because he was a person who did not embellish, and the absence of embellishment made the sentence weigh more than it would have with decoration around it. He wrote about the text messages. He wrote that he had sent the first line without a clear intention, that it had felt like a natural continuation of the evening. He wrote that her reply had surprised him in the best way, that the exchange they had conducted across 90 minutes had told him more about how her mind worked than most people managed to convey in months of regular contact, and that this had made him feel something he did not immediately have a name for and had not tried to name. He wrote about October. He wrote about the archive room specifically. He wrote about standing close together in the good light. He wrote that when their hands had met on the edge of the paper, he had been fully aware of the contact, that he had not moved away because he had not wanted to move away, and that the moment had stayed with him afterward in a way that made clear to him what it was. He did not write the exact word. He did not need to. He wrote around it in the same way she had, building it from its parts, and reading the construction of it, she understood that they had been doing the same thing in parallel for months, without knowing the other was doing it too. He wrote about the Thursday morning coffee visits. He wrote that they had become the anchor of his week in a way that had happened gradually, and then all at once, in the manner of most things that matter. He wrote that he had begun, without designing to notice what time it was relative to Thursday. That he had begun to notice, when reading or working, that he wanted to tell her things, not because she would find them useful, but because she would understand them, and because imagining her response had become a habit he had not chosen and could not locate the beginning of. He wrote about the Tuesday evening, the evening of the pamphlet. He wrote that he had found the pamphlet weeks earlier and had not mentioned it, because mentioning it required another meeting, and he was at this point manufacturing reasons for meetings quite regularly, and had decided he should stop manufacturing them and simply have them and call them what they were. He wrote that he had not managed to call them what they were, not to himself, not aloud, until that evening when she had read the pamphlet in his library, and he had watched her face and had understood, with the quiet certainty of something that has been true for a long time being acknowledged at last, that whatever this was had become permanent in a way that was not reversible. He wrote, "I do not use the word love easily, and I am not going to use it here, because it seems too simple for what I mean. What I mean is that you are the person I want to be in a room with. You are the person whose opinion of any given thing I find myself working out in my head before I know my own. You are the person whose face I look for when I am somewhere new, before I remember that you are not there. This has been true for some time, and I have been treating it as information rather than as something requiring action, and I am tired of treating it as only information. I want to say it in the center." Clara stopped reading. She looked up from the pages. The kitchen sounds had stopped. The flat was very quiet. She looked back down at the letter. He had written, "I am telling you this now because your letter arrived this morning and I read it and then I read it again, and I find that I am no longer interested in being careful at the expense of being honest. I have been careful for a long time. Careful is clean and manageable and does not require anything from anyone, but I do not want to be careful with you anymore. I do not want to keep the thing I mean at the edge of things, in the footnotes, in the plausible deniability of Thursday mornings and book recommendations and hands that happen to meet on the edge of archive paper." He had written, "I am frightened of this. I want to be clear about that. I am not a person who finds it easy to say what I mean directly, despite what you may have concluded from our Thursday mornings. Saying it about practical things, about books, about work, about ideas is easy. Saying it about a person is different. Saying it about you is the most different it has been in a very long time, which I take as information about what this is. He had written, I am writing this at 6:30 in the morning. I have not decided whether to send it. I may put it in the drawer and leave it there, but I wanted it to exist. I wanted the true version of what I think to be on paper somewhere, even if it goes nowhere, even if you never read it. And then, at the very bottom of the third page, in slightly larger handwriting than the rest, I hope you read it. Clara looked at this last line for a long time. She heard footsteps from the kitchen. She looked up. Sebastian came through the doorway of the library carrying 2 cups of tea. He did not say anything. He looked at her face, at the pages of the letter in her hands, at whatever was on her face that she was apparently not managing to conceal, and he set the cups on the side table beside the reading chair and sat down in the window seat across from her. He waited. Clara looked at the final line one more time. I hope you read it. You wrote this at 6:30, she said. Yes, he said. And then you went on your walk, she said. Yes, he said. While I was at home, she said, in a state that I would describe as significant distress, calling you twice, trying to work out how to get the letter back. Yes, he said. She looked at him. We wrote letters at the same time, she said. Within a few hours of each other, he said. Yes. About the same things, she said. In some respects, he said. Different in others. I read yours, you have read mine, you can make your own assessment. Clara set his letter down on the arm of the chair. She picked up her tea. The cup was warm against her palms, the right temperature, which was Sebastian all over. He paid attention to temperature, to small practical details, to the specifics of what made a thing right rather than merely adequate. He had noticed over the past 4 months that she took her tea with the bag left in for 4 minutes exactly and with a small amount of milk, and he had never once asked her to remind him. She drank her tea. He drank his. Outside the library windows, the December night had fully arrived. The city was doing its evening things, lights coming on in windows across the street, a car moving slowly through the dark, someone walking past the garden wall with a dog that sniffed at the gate without stopping. I was going to take the letter back, Clara said. I was going to take it back and pretend none of this had happened and continue as we were. I know, he said. And you came back to stop me, she said. I came back, he said, because I thought the version of events where you succeeded in taking it back, and we continued, as we were, would be worse for you than the version where I walked home early, and we sat in the library and were honest with each other. For me, she said. Or for you. He considered this. Both, he said, but I was thinking about you. Clara looked at him. She looked at the way the lamp caught his face, steady and clear and entirely without guile, and she thought about 4 months of Thursday mornings in archive rooms and text messages at midnight and a pamphlet found weeks early but held on to, and she thought about a letter written at 6:30 in the morning that said, in its careful, unembellished way, every true thing that matched the 4 pages she had written at 2 in the morning, and she felt the last of the scaffolding go, not all at once. Quietly, the way things that have been held in place for a long time release, gradually, and then completely. She said, what do we do now? Sebastian said, we talk. We have been talking for 4 months, she said. We have been talking around it for 4 months, he said. This is different. She nodded. This is different, she agreed. He picked up his teacup and turned it a quarter turn on the arm of the window seat. She watched him do it. He noticed her noticing. The cup, she said. The cup, he confirmed, and this time there was the suggestion of something warm at the edge of his expression. I have been watching that for months, she said. I know, he said. I noticed you noticing. She stared at him. How long ago? October, he said. October, she repeated, with something that was not quite outrage but was close to it. You noticed in October that I had noticed the cup, and you have been sitting on that since October. I thought it was better than commenting on it, he said. You might have stopped. Clara stared at him for a long moment, and then, for the first time in the entire strange and exhausting and somehow extraordinary afternoon, she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not the careful laugh she deployed at departmental gatherings and dinner parties. A real one, sudden and genuine, filling the quiet library with a warmth that surprised both of them. Sebastian watched her laugh, and his expression did something she had never seen it do, something that was entirely open and entirely pleased, as though this specific thing, her laughing in his library in the December dark, was exactly what he had been working toward. The laughter settled. The library held it for a moment afterward, the way a room holds warmth reluctantly, slowly, until it finds its own equilibrium again. Clara looked at Sebastian across the amber-lit space between them and felt the strange, specific relief of being herself in a room with another person. Not the curated version, not the composed, contained, professional Clara Voss, just herself. The person who had written 4 pages at 2 in the morning, who had walked through December streets in her night clothes, who had come to this library with a borrowed key and a plan that was, in retrospect, both entirely understandable and deeply unlike what any version of herself she showed the world would have done. "Tell me something you have never told anyone," she said. Sebastian looked at her. He considered it genuinely, taking the question seriously. "I grew up in a house that was very loud," he said. "Not violently loud, just full of noise. My parents argued constantly, not about anything serious, just about everything, about television and dinner and which way to drive and whether a window should be open or closed. The house was always full of sound. I used to lie awake at night and wish for quiet and not be able to imagine what it would feel like." He paused. He looked at the bookshelves. "I started building a private reading space in my bedroom when I was 11, he said. "I put books on every surface. I used to sit in the middle of them and feel enclosed, protected, like the books were a wall between me and the noise outside the door, like if I was surrounded by enough pages, the pages would absorb the sound before it reached me." He looked at the shelves around them. "I have been building that same room ever since," he said, "in different places, different configurations, more books, more deliberate silence, getting better at making the quiet I needed." Clara looked at the shelves. She thought about what he had said in the coffee shop 3 weeks ago, that he had once been afraid of silences and had learned to trust them. She understood now where that had started, not in an abstract philosophical shift, but in an 11-year-old boy with books stacked on every surface, learning to build quiet out of whatever materials were available. "The library is the room," she said. "The library is the room," he agreed. "And you let me in it," she said. He looked at her. "From the second visit," he said. "Yes." She sat with this, the second visit. He had started letting her in not just through the door but into the thing the room meant to him from the second time she was here. She tried to remember the second visit, October early, the manuscript she had wanted to look at, the 2 hours that had followed and had felt, even then, unusually comfortable. She had noticed the ease of it but had not thought to ask why. She knew now. "What is something no one knows about you?" he said, returning it. She thought, not the obvious things. She had put those in the letter and he had memorized them. "I failed my driving test 3 times, she said. Sebastian looked at her. "You do not drive," he said. "I know," she said. "By the 3rd failure I had decided I disliked driving and that the city had adequate public transport." This is both true and also a convenient reframing of having failed 3 times. He was watching her with the near smile she had come to read over 4 months. "Did the 3rd failure involve anything notable?" he said. "I drove into a roundabout the wrong way," she said. "The wrong way," he said carefully. "The wrong way," she confirmed. The examiner used the phrase significant navigational error. "A diplomatic examiner," Sebastian said. "I thought so at the time," she said. They were quiet for a moment, not the weighted silence of earlier but a different kind, the comfortable quiet of 2 people who have said the large things and are now simply in each other's company, the pressure released, the room easier around them. "Your letter," Clara said. "The part where you wrote that you want to say it in the center, what did you mean?" He looked at her steadily. "You know what I meant," he said. "I want to hear you say it," she said. Sebastian was quiet for a moment. He set his tea down. He looked at her with the expression that was open and attentive and completely without guile. "I mean," he said, "that I am not going to put the important thing in the footnotes anymore. Not with you. I mean that I am done managing the distance between what I feel and what I say. I mean that I want this to be what it is, openly, without the hedge of Thursdays or mutual literary interest, or whatever other framing I have been using to make it something manageable instead of something true." "What is it?" she said. He looked at her. "You know what it is," he said. "I wrote it in a letter and walked through December streets at 4 in the morning," she said. "The least you can do is say it." The edge of his expression moved. He looked at her with the thing she had been watching develop across 4 months, the warmth that was not performed, the attention that was not effort, the quality of someone whose interest in you is entire and entirely genuine. I love you, he said, simply without embellishment, the way he said everything important. Clara felt the sentence land in the center of her chest and stay there. She looked at him across the amber-lit library, the familiar books on all sides, the December dark at the windows, the 2 cups of tea cooling on the side table. I love you, she said. It did not feel as terrifying as she had expected. It felt, in fact, like the most natural sentence she had said in months, like a correction to a long-running error, like the word that had been missing from the middle of every conversation they had conducted for the past 4 months finally returned to its place. Sebastian breathed. Something in his shoulders released. A tension she had not noticed was there until it was gone, and he looked at her with an expression that was close to relief. Not the relief of a conclusion, but the relief of a beginning that had been waiting for a very long time to start. They talked for the next 2 hours about what they were each afraid of. About Sebastian's difficulty with closeness, not coldness, never coldness, but a long habit of keeping a particular kind of distance that had protected him well and had also, he said, cost him a great deal. About Clara's difficulty with being seen, her belief, held so long it had started to feel like fact, that being fully known by another person was the precondition for being left by them, and that control over what was known was therefore a form of safety. That is not safety, Sebastian said. That is isolation with good lighting. She looked at him. That is very accurate, she said. I know, he said. I lived it for about 15 years. And then, she said. And then I built a library and started inviting one person into it, he said. She was quiet for a moment. One person, she said. One person, he confirmed. Clara looked around the room, the books she knew by now, the reading chair, the window seat, the desk. I am not good at this, she said. I want to be honest about that. I am not good at being in something and not managing it. I know, Sebastian said. I will make it difficult, she said. I know that too, he said. I am not expecting it to be easy, I am expecting it to be honest. Those are different things. She looked at him. What are you not good at, she said. Tell me honestly, what should I know? He thought about this seriously. He did not deflect. I go away inside myself when things are hard, he said. Not permanently and not coldly, but I have a habit of needing time alone with difficult feelings before I can share them. This can look, from the outside, like withdrawal. It has been misread before as lack of care when it was the opposite. I need you to know that if I am quiet, it is not distance. How will I know the difference, she said. I will tell you, he said. If you ask, I will tell you. Ask me if you are not sure. All right, she said, I will ask. And if you go quiet, he said, I will give you space, but I will ask too, once, not repeatedly. Once is enough, she said. Good, he said. Outside, the December night had deepened to the blue-black of late evening. Clara looked at the window and realized they had been talking for 2 hours and neither of them had noticed the time passing. She looked at Sebastian. He looked back at her, and the looking was different now, not the careful, managed looking of 4 months of maintained friendship, but something more direct, more present, more allowed. I should go home, she said. You should, he agreed. He did not say stay, and she did not want him to. The not saying was its own kind of trust. She stood, she put on her coat. She picked up his letter from the arm of the reading chair. She looked at him. Can I keep this? It is yours, he said. It always was. She picked up the cream envelope from the table between them, her own letter, and held it out to him. He took it. He held it in both hands for a moment, then put it in the breast pocket of his coat and looked at her. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she said. She went to the side door. He walked out with her down the short corridor and held the door open into the cold December night. She stepped out, turned up her collar, and stood for a moment on the side path with the amber light from the open door falling across the stone. She looked at him. He looked at her. She turned and walked through the gate and down the familiar street, and this time she looked back once. He was standing in the doorway, the light around him, watching her go. She had been right to think this would be difficult to manage. It was entirely difficult to manage. She felt it in her whole body, the unfamiliar, unprotected, entirely welcome feeling of being known, of being seen completely by someone who had chosen to look and had not looked away. She turned back toward home and walked, and did not try to manage anything. 4 months later, On a bright morning in early April, when the Edinburgh light had finally come back properly after the long winter, Clara walked the familiar 12 minutes from her flat above the bookshop to Sebastian's house, knocked twice on the side door out of habit, and let herself in without waiting for an answer. This was new, not the being there. She had been there dozens of times since December. But the letting herself in without a pause at the threshold, without the small negotiation of knocking and waiting and being admitted, had taken her until March to do comfortably. Sebastian had given her the key officially in January, a different key from the borrowed one she had used in December, a new one cut specifically for her, and set on a ring with a piece of worn blue leather, because he knew her well enough to know she liked to be able to find things quickly in her bag. She had not told him this, he had simply noticed. She had needed until March to use the new key without the pause. The pause was residual, the old habit of checking whether she was welcome, whether her presence was an imposition. Sebastian had been patient with the pause. He had not commented on it or tried to speed it up. He had simply been where she expected him to be every time she arrived, and over the course of January and February and the beginning of March, the pause had shortened and then stopped. She went through the hallway and into the kitchen, which was warmer than the rest of the house because Sebastian had been making breakfast. He was at the counter, his back to her, cutting bread with the focused attention he brought to most tasks. He did not turn when she came in, which was also new, the ease of her arrival in his space. The bookshop had a delivery, she said, putting her bag on the chair by the door. 3 boxes. Alice was beside herself. What was in them? He said, still cutting bread. Mostly estate stock, she said. Some very good things. There was a set of the Loeb classics with all the original covers that I had to actively walk away from. You should have bought them, he said. I spend too much money in that bookshop, she said. I live above it. It is a design flaw. He set the bread down and turned. He was wearing his Saturday clothes, a navy jumper old and worn at the elbows, and he looked at her with the expression that had become, over 4 months, entirely familiar. The direct, attentive, entirely genuine expression that she had spent the first month after December telling herself not to read too much into, and had, by January, stopped telling herself anything about because reading it correctly was simply what she did now. Tea, he said. Please, she said. She sat at the kitchen table. The kitchen was different from the library, lighter, less ceremonial, the place where the actual life of the house happened. She had come to know this room in a different way from the library, the particular shelf where he kept the tea, the drawer where the good knives were, the single plant on the windowsill that he watered every Friday morning with a small inherited watering can that was too nice to be practical, but that he had kept for 20 years because it had belonged to someone he loved. She sat with her hands around the warm cup and watched him make the tea with the focus he brought to it, and thought about December. About the Tuesday evening, the letter, the 4 in the morning walk, the search, the side door clicking open. She thought about it the way she had come to think about most things from that period, with a kind of clear-eyed, almost fond disbelief. She had gone into a man's library to retrieve an honest letter. He had come home early specifically to stop her from doing so and had then recited the letter back to her from memory. These were the facts. They were, she thought, excellent facts. You are thinking about December again, Sebastian said, setting the tea in front of her. She looked up. How can you tell? Your expression, he said. He sat down across from her. You have a face you make when you are remembering something that was both terrible and, in retrospect, fortunate. It is slightly different from your face when you are thinking about something currently difficult. You have a catalogue of my faces, she said. A small one, he said, about 12 distinct entries. I want to know all 12, she said. I will write them down, he said. Do not write them down, she said. Tell me. He looked at her over his tea. The morning light from the window was good, the April light that was different from winter light in ways she had been unable to articulate until she started spending time in this kitchen. He looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them rushed the moment. The December face, he said, appears when you think about what would have happened if you had got to the letter first. I think about that, she admitted. I know, he said. If I had got there 10 minutes earlier, she said, before your walk ended. You would have taken the letter, he said. And gone home, she said. And we would have had Thursday coffee and talked about books, and I would have spent another 4 months holding everything at a careful distance, until one of us moved away or gave up or the whole thing quietly closed like a door no one intended to shut. He did not deny this. He simply looked at her across the kitchen table and said quietly, "But you did not get there 10 minutes earlier." "No," she said, "I did not." "You were 2 steps from the desk," he said. 2 steps, she agreed. "You walked in at 9:52. "I was going to turn around at the corner," he said. "Then I kept walking." She looked at him. "What made you keep walking?" He thought about this. "I knew you," he said. "I knew that if I let you take it back there would not be another letter. You would not do it twice. You would decide it was not worth the risk and you would put the whole thing away somewhere and it would stay there. And I did not want it to stay there." Clara held her cup with both hands and thought about the specific geometry of that Wednesday morning. The two of them moving toward each other from opposite ends of a decision, him turning around at the top of the street, her stepping through the gate at 9:20, the clock running, the desk in the library with the cream envelope sitting face down on the upper left corner of it. 2 steps, 9:52. "We have very good timing," she said. "We have terrible timing," he said. 4 months of terrible timing, followed by 9 minutes of extremely precise timing. She laughed, and he watched her laugh with the expression she had been cataloging since December. She had learned things about him in these 4 months that the careful friendship had not shown her. She had learned that he was a worse cook than he let on, competent with a specific set of things, and unprepared to admit the limits of that set. She had learned that he kept a notebook of lines, not his own writing but lines from other people's writing that had lodged with him, and that he had been keeping it since he was about 20 years old, and that there were 7 notebooks now, and that she was apparently in the most recent one, though he had not told her what he had written and she had decided not to ask yet. She had learned that he slept less than she had expected and read more, and that he sometimes woke at 4 or 5 in the morning and went to the library without quite knowing he had decided to, and that this was not a sign of difficulty but simply how he was. She had learned that he was patient with other people's slow arrivals at things because he understood slow arrivals from the inside. He had learned things about her too. He knew about the driving test. He had learned that she was a person who needed time alone at the end of a long social week, not because she was unhappy, but because the managing of her public self required energy and the replenishing of that energy required quiet, and he had adapted to this without comment or negotiation. He had learned that when she said something sharp, it was more likely to mean she was tired than that she was genuinely upset, and that this distinction mattered. She had told him about her parents, eventually, about the household of emotional management, the training in containment, the years of learning that feelings were things you handled privately and presented in edited form. He had listened without interrupting, and when she finished he had said, "That is a very tiring way to have grown up," and she had felt something in the precision of this response, not pity, not a rush to fix anything, just an accurate acknowledgement, that had made her feel more seen than almost anything else he had said. They had also argued, not significantly, not with lasting damage, but with the honest friction of two people learning each other's actual edges. She had been sharp with him once about something that had not been his fault, and he had gone quiet in exactly the way he had warned her he would, and she had waited, and the next morning he had told her what had bothered him about it with characteristic directness. She had apologized properly, the direct one, not the managed one. He had said it was fine and meant it. She had not managed the situation, she had simply been in it. She reached across the kitchen table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over under hers, unhurried, and held it. "I am seeing Philip for lunch," she said. "He has a theory about the Browning letters that I find unconvincing, and he knows I find it unconvincing, and he wants to argue about it anyway." "Philip's theories require arguing," Sebastian said. "He would not present them otherwise." "He presented this one at a conference last autumn, and apparently 2 people agreed with him," Clara said. "That will have made him worse," Sebastian said. "Much worse," she agreed. They sat for a moment in the morning kitchen, her hand over his, the April light doing its work on the walls and the single plant on the windowsill and the inherited watering can. Outside, the Edinburgh street was doing its Saturday morning things. Clara thought about the cream envelope on the library shelf. She had put it there in January, her letter, the one Sebastian had kept and returned to her on the day after the December confrontation, when she had come back on a Thursday as agreed, and he had said that he thought she should have it back. She had asked him why. He had said that it was hers, that it was the truest thing she had ever written, and that it belonged with her, and that he did not need to keep it because he had memorized every word of it anyway. She had stood in the library doorway with the envelope in her hands and had said, "You really do remember all of it." Every word, he had said. She had looked at the bookshelves. She had found a space between a first edition of Tisvetiva's poems, the poet whose lines had started their text messages in September, and a small smooth stone she had given him in February, picked up on the shore at Fife during a walk they had taken together on a day when the North Sea was grey and wild and entirely itself. She had placed the envelope there. He had not moved it. His letter was there too, beside hers. She had put it there herself with his permission. 2 cream envelopes and 1 white envelope and a small stone from the sea, between the Tisvetiva and the pressed edge of the shelf. She had not told many people about any of this. She had told Lucy that she was seeing someone, and Lucy had said, "Is it the person you were not thinking about during the lecture?" And Clara had said, "I was entirely focused on the lecture," and Lucy had said, "Right," in a way that suggested she did not believe this. Owen had called in February to ask how things were going, and had managed to be simultaneously very knowing about it and very tactful, which was Owen's particular gift. Sebastian had said in January, "I have not told anyone about this." She had said, "Is that a problem?" He had said, "I did not say that, I said I have not. I will tell people when it feels right. For now I like having it to ourselves." She had understood this. She had felt it too, the particular quality of something new and real that belongs, for a time, only to the 2 people in it. Sebastian finished his tea. He stood and went to the counter and began assembling breakfast with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has a system and believes in it. She watched him from the table. Outside the window, the April morning continued to do what April mornings in Edinburgh do, change every few minutes, light and cloud and light again, the city reinventing itself continuously. She thought about something she had been composing, somewhere in the back of her mind, for the past several weeks. Not a letter this time. She did not need a letter this time. It was a sentence, just one, but it was the most accurate sentence she had found for the thing she had been carrying since December, and she had been waiting for the right moment to say it. She had been learning over 4 months that the right moment was usually the ordinary one, not the grand occasion. The Tuesday morning, the kitchen, the April light. "Sebastian," she said. He looked over his shoulder at her. "I am glad I did not get to the desk in time," she said. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to what he was doing, but she could see, from the change in his shoulders, the slight release of something held, that the sentence had landed exactly where she intended it. "I am glad too," he said. She looked at his back and at the window beyond him and at the plant on the sill in the good April light. She thought about 2 letters written in the same dark morning hours. She thought about a key that had never been returned, sitting in a bowl with a hair tie and 2 forgotten coins. She thought about a walk cut short at 9:52, and a woman with her hand half raised 2 steps from a desk, and the 9 minutes that had made all the difference. She thought about the library shelf, the 3 envelopes and the stone from the sea. She had gone to take something back. She had stood in the center of his library in her coat, having crossed a city in the December afternoon with a borrowed key, and a plan that was, at its heart, a plan to erase herself, to unmake the truest thing she had ever written before it could be seen and answered. She had not succeeded. And she understood now in the plain, clear April morning of her own life that this was the best thing that had ever happened to her. Not the letter, not even the memorizing of it, though she would carry that for the rest of her life. The fact that she had failed to take it back. The fact that a man had turned around at the top of a street at 9:45 in the morning because he knew how she thought, and had walked home, and had stood in the doorway of his library and not been surprised to find her there, and had set the cream envelope on the table between them and said, very quietly, that he was not going to give it back. She had spent 34 years being the person who did not say the important thing, who put it in footnotes, who managed the distance between feeling and speaking until the distance became its own kind of life. She was done with that. She had decided to be done with that on a Tuesday morning in the small hours with a pen in her hand and 4 pages of cream paper in front of her, and she had been done with it every morning since. She picked up her tea. She looked at the room. She looked at Sebastian at the counter, at his back, at the navy jumper worn at the elbows, at the way his hands moved with the same attention he brought to everything he handled, everything he chose to be in the presence of and take seriously. She did not try to manage what she felt. She let it be there, all of it, exactly as large as it was. She stayed in the room.